All right. Well, Ken, I'm going to tempt fate here and have a sip of coffee before we officially get started here.
Let's both have a sip.
Mm. Nothing like some hydration and some mouth sounds to get the audience
Mm-mm-mm.
ready for the Gestalt IT rundown. Really, what better way to be a metaphor for the IT news of the week than spilling a beverage all over ourselves? So let's, I think, get it going. Action-packed week of news. By action-packed, I mean there was substantive news of note, and we will cover it all here on the Gestalt IT rundown. Ken, are you ready?
I am so ready.
Awesome. All right, let's get it going then. In three, two, and then that one. Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino. I'm an editor with Gestalt IT. Joining me from across a little bit of land in this great nation of ours, a subset of land within the overall nation, several states, in fact, is the one, the only, the Cloudman himself, Ken Nalbone. Ken, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Really only one state, and thankfully it's only overland unless you take some weird route over the Great Lakes.
But there are several states of mine that you have to
That's
go
true.
to get to there. So,
And driving across Ohio and Indiana is probably just going to induce multiple states of rage.
rage, depression, flatland, it all works
Exactly.
out either way. Let's get it started, though, with a little segment we like to call News or Not. This is where we have, just too much news to have substantive conversations on each, but I need to check with Ken if these individual items are, in fact, newsworthy or not. First up here, we have some interesting news from security researchers at Checkpoint Software. They demonstrated installing ransomware on a Canon 80D DSLR. Installing the ransomware used the picture transfer protocol over Wi-Fi or USB, which doesn't require any authentication. This comes with a ton of different cameras, not just Canon. The ransomware encrypted images in the camera's SD card to prevent access. Counterpoint contacted Canon back in March, and the two have come out with a patch and have been working on it since May and came out with a patch just a couple days ago when the story broke. The researchers said that while their exploit was specific to Canon, any camera that uses the picture transfer protocol may be vulnerable to a similar attack, basically because it doesn't authenticate anything. Ken, ransomware on your camera, news or not?
Kind of interesting, kind of scary, not particularly newsworthy unless you have photography as a source of revenue income. For most consumers, if they forget to update the firmware on their camera, which sounds like it's already available, then they might have the prospect of losing last month's photos of their kids' first day of school or something like that. Well, that'd be sad, but not life shattering. So,
Yeah, what was troubling about this was because it's over Wi-Fi, you could really set up just kind of a honeypot to automatically connect to anything if people were trying to transfer their phones or something like that, and essentially have a backdoor to theoretically a wider range of people. Although how many people are transferring wireless pictures in any given location, still making you realize that you have a computing device everywhere you go. Next up here, Broadcom announced it will acquire the cybersecurity company Symantec for a cool $10.7 billion in cash. This is the second major acquisition to diversify Broadcom away from the chip market after they acquired CA Technologies for $19 billion in 2018. Broadcom expects the deal to result in $1 billion in cost synergies over the next 12 months, aka layoffs. The deal is expected to close before the end of 2019. We had talked about this earlier the year. It seemed like the deal was off. Seems like Symantec realized, hey, maybe we're not worth quite as much as we thought. Closing on this deal, Ken, news or not?
I think it's news. I mean, it's a big acquisition and therefore a big deal, right? Especially since it's a chimp company buying yet another software company, which is not really expected. I'm not sure what Broadcom's vision is for their company as a whole with all these acquisitions. Hopefully, their leadership is, and it's not just a buying frenzy.
Yeah, and it seems like for now that they want to maintain this as kind of a wholly owned subsidiary, not really pushing to incorporate this, making a security play on silicon like Intel tried a few years ago when they acquired, was it McAfee or
Yes, it was.
whatever security firm they bought? Yeah. So interesting that's more of a hands off approach other than all of the layoffs that are surely coming. Next up here, the voting village at the DEF CON security conference featured a $10 million prototype voting machine developed by DARPA. You may know them as creators of futuristic, semi-scary things. Originally announced in March, the voting machine is an open source platform and will be built on purpose-built hardware, although the prototype right now is just running on virtualized hardware. But this is all going to be built from the ground up, not using any consumer silicon to ensure that you don't have any like really basic hacks on documented hardware that are available right out the gate. The machine uses a touchscreen to register votes, then prints out the selections with a QR code in the corner of the ballot. These printouts are then scanned. The QR code serves as a cryptographic validity check. DARPA hopes to have a complete system to access at DEF CON 2020 with all of that kind of custom-made hardware. The system will offer a code repository for researchers to test, available just on GitHub, as well as offer a small test board to look for hardware vulnerabilities. So again, not trying to come up with some kind of proprietary solution, but saying, hey, everybody, try to break this as much as possible. This is the best way to ensure voting security. Open source voting platforms, Ken, news or not?
I like DARPA. They're kind of like the branch of the Defense Department that is almost trustworthy. But this is an early POC, so it's not really news yet. Maybe it develops into something in the future. It's kind of a cool idea. I'd be interested to see where it goes, but it's nothing earth-shattering yet. I mean, ARPANET became the internet, so that was a cool project. But then there was the DARPA Grand Challenge trying to move forward autonomous vehicle creation, and that seemed to fizzle out. And now we have other self-driving car projects. So it's going to be somewhere in between those two, probably.
Yeah, and maybe the best case scenario is that whatever they learn from this, even if this isn't something that they commercialize and sell to states or the federal government or something like that, if they can have documented lessons of, hey, these are the easiest ways for voting systems to typically be exploited or something like that, maybe that's valuable to the industry overall.
And if nothing else, we can learn from their mistakes.
All right. And finally, here on News or Nah, we have another installment in our famous series of configuration misconfigurations that are actually massive privacy breaches. That sound drop was worth the wait. News research presented at DEF CON showed that exposed elastic block storage snapshots may be the new exposed S3 buckets, Ken. That's just so exciting to me. Researcher Ben Morris made a tool using Amazon's internal search and scraped publicly exposed EBS snapshots, then attached it, made a copy of the list of the contents to a volume on his own system. Doing this over the course of a month and spending just a couple $100 for AWS credits and expenses, Morris was able to get VPN configuration, application keys, critical user and administrative credentials, source code from major tech companies, governments, and healthcare organizations. Pretty much a lot of big important organizations kind of guilty of this practice. Amazon has since notified customers with public snapshots, letting them know to take them down if they were unintentionally made public. But will this always just be a game of misconfiguration whack-a-mole, Ken?
It seems like more or less. And yes, this is news, by the way, since it gave you the opportunity to finally use.
Yes,
it gave you the opportunity to use that. So of course it's news. Any chance to use a sad trombone is a news story. There you go. So if you thought you were safe because you pay close attention to your object storage settings in your S3 buckets or whatever, think again. It's important to pay attention to the security and configuration of all your cloud resources. So the question is this due to negligence on the part of the account owners or bad defaults in Amazon? It sounds like it's the former. People not paying attention.
Well, and what Morris had kind of pointed out was that these snapshots didn't necessarily stay up for a very long time, but using that the Amazon's own search and just constantly running it at a very short interval, even if it was only up for a few minutes and someone realized the error and took it back down, he was able to grab it extremely quickly. Basically what we've seen with S3 buckets, right? Whenever there's any kind of security keys or crypto wallets, people are automatically scraping those, looking for those actively. And I imagine that will be the case with the EBS snapshots as well.
And that's kind of just the pitfall of being in the cloud, is that everything is so easy to make accessible that it's very easy for the wrong people to find information, even in that brief period of time. So it really is incumbent upon the account owners to understand these things and to be proactive. And in the cases of, you mentioned, if somebody puts it up temporarily, realizes the error, and then takes it down, they might have to launch into their whole incident response plan just for that minor, maybe not minor, but short amount of time that something was public, because who knows what could have happened.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, let's get into our first discussion story here. And I love a good meaty chip story, and I love a good meaty AMD chip story, and this is no exception. AMD unveiled their second generation EPYC platform called Roam. This provides a new CPU architecture based on Zen 2 and built on a 7-nanometer process, offering up to 8 memory channels, 128 lanes of PCIe 4.0 I/O, and up to 64 cores per socket. And generally, these will be in 2-socket configurations. Instructions per clock is up 15% based on the outgoing Naples platform, with double the AVX2 floating point performance. One of the big advantages in moving is that Roam moves away from the Naples platform, which had a non-uniform memory architecture. Essentially, within the chip, it was kind of configured. The way the memory was shared was like it was 2 separate processors. And that was just because of the way they it was a very I don't want to say a hack job, but it was very kind of quickly mashed together for speed of development, not necessarily for efficiency of the processor. With Roam, that's been really refined into a central I/O hub for the CPU cores, which will allow for reduced latency between core sets and make optimized latency easier for developers. And then it will also take advantage of any optimizations they made for Naples within that CPU when then they move to the two core or the two socket configuration, which is kind of nice. Compared to Intel, this offers up to 50 to 100% higher performance while offering 40% lower prices based on the top tier Intel scalable Xeons with double the IO lanes. And those IO lanes are actually PCI 4 versus PCI 3, which is actually then doubled, more lanes and also double the speed. Does this make you a believer that AMD can be relevant long term in the data center? Ken, well, I think we're no longer now impressed that AMD can come out with a new generation that for a while is better than what Intel can offer. But no one's making data center purchasing decisions based on a 1 year win, right? So does this prove that AMD is a viable solution long term in the data center like this?
Well, call me Agent Mulder because I want to believe. I like AMD and I like what they're doing. I'm not ready to crown them a true competitor yet.
Mhm.
And it's mostly due to perception, right? They've been making lots of positive moves in the past couple of years with the advancements they've made. I'm sure the hardware enthusiasts love everything that you just said. But infrastructure is a multi-year investment for most companies, right? And they want to know that the technology they're purchasing is proven. Things like performance, reliability, and value are very important. AMD basically needs a few generations of EPYC under their belt to earn the trust of these enterprise companies that are going to purchase something that's going to sit in a data center for 3, 5, even more years. The real opportunity for AMD has been showing up in the cloud providers, which they've been seeing some wins with. They've been in AWS for a little while now, and both Azure and GCP recently announced that they're going to support EPYC-based instances, which is very attractive for consumers for a better price to performance ratio. So I see that as kind of the temporary way that they kind of grasp some market share and work their way long-term into the data center. So if they keep it up in terms of producing hardware that is both innovative and competitive price-wise with Intel, they're on that path, but they're not quite there yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, and with consumers, obviously, it's an easier play because you're buying it to play a game or run certain applications or whatever like that. And yeah, it's anywhere from a 2 to 5 year, I guess, purchasing decision for that. Whereas enterprises are investing millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in this, and that's not something you can just fly overnight and make that switch over, even though they're all running the same instruction set with x86. What I think is very interesting to me is they seem to have been really keyed in that, yes, at any given point, Intel is going to probably come back and beat them on instructions per clock. Someone's going to shove more cores in there, but they really seem to be hanging their hat on just putting a ton of IO into these platforms. Naples on top of that was right up there. Was their big lead, right? They could claim performance parity, I guess, with Intel, which was a big accomplishment for AMD 2 years ago, but a huge IO lead. And when you're looking at that as being an increasingly where latency is increasingly important, less so than performance in a lot of applications. I think that is an important point that AMD kind of identified as a way to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next up here at the Huawei Developer Conference. Hey, this isn't a trade war story, guys. This is awesome. At the Huawei Developer Conference, CEO Richard Yu unveiled Harmony OS, an open source microkernel-based distributed OS primarily aimed at IoT devices. Yu stated the OS was faster and safer than Android, which kind of set up a false dichotomy in some of the coverage here. It's really not an Android competitor. And that the event that Huawei can no longer access the Android ecosystem, the company can deploy Harmony OS at any time. And by at any time, they're hoping to not have to do that in those situations. The OS doesn't allow for root access thanks to kernel isolation. The way the microkernel is set up, you don't actually ever get root access to the kernel. And it uses formal mathematical verification to spot vulnerabilities, as well as featuring a deterministic latency engine to allocate resources with real-time analysis and forecasting. They're comparing this to things like Google's Fuchsia OS and QNX. QNX is a real-time operating system, so I'm not sure if I didn't see in the documentation that this is real time, but they're claiming real time like capabilities and reliability. We'll see how that plays out. But they're claiming it's 5 times faster than Google's Fuchsia, which isn't even out, so that's just made up numbers. But 3 times faster than QNX, which is very established in the automotive industry. Harmony OS will first come out in smart displays. In fact, they already have the first kind of smart display announced, and will still include the Linux kernel and Huawei's LightOS kernel alongside its microkernel for the time being. With version 2.0 due out in 2020, that will those two other kernels will just go away. They'll have better graphics support. And it seems like that's like the actual release of this. Definitely not an Android killer, but can Huawei make IoT more secure with microkernels, Ken?
There's a two-part answer to that. One, do I think IoT can be more secure with microkernels? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think people trust Huawei to deliver a more secure operating environment for these devices? Not necessarily. The trade war you mentioned has kind of tainted their reputation, so it's going to be difficult. So folks who don't understand the architecture of this OS, and I'm kind of one of those, I understood most of what they were talking about there. I understand what a microkernel is. So the people who don't understand the OS or tech in general aren't likely to buy into this. They're not going to necessarily think that Huawei's OS is the way to go because they just hear Huawei and they think bad things. So sorry, Huawei. Even if you have the best intentions here, you're going to be struggling, climbing uphill against public perception on this one.
Well, the one thing I will say in terms of like being hopeful for better IoT security is being open source. Yes, I'm sure there's going to be a pay Huawei for support, right, for Harmony OS, and you get the operating system for free. Every open source project's business model, right? But theoretically, this could be something that could be used by the hundreds, thousands of small scale IoT providers, and it come up with a more secure base. Yes, if they're not getting the latest patches and support, how valuable is that? But if we can set at least a higher floor for the currently abysmal state of like weird anonymous IoT, Chinese made or whatever, just weird IoT devices, that to me makes the entire ecosystem better. Again, I don't think that's a permanent solution, but it could be a nice side effect of this, even with kind of hesitancy of anything with the name Huawei on it in the US at least.
Exactly. And of course, again, the architecture seems like a sound idea. It is just a perception problem. It'd have to be a fork that is completely separated from Huawei in some way that people wouldn't even realize that, or if they knew that it was distantly involved, that it's no longer part of that, for it to be something that is massively adopted.
But for people that don't realize, the big distinction there is, not being able to have root access. The problem with a lot of IoT devices, if you're not familiar, is that especially for, kind of these no-name devices that just kind of sit on your network, either they have hard-coded like user credentials that you cannot change. You cannot change the password, cannot change the username, or by default, they're operating all the time in root and the password is Tor or something like, it's just root backwards. And that's what a lot of kind of default Linux distributions use. And if you don't know to change that, or if you don't have the ability to change that, it just becomes just this gaping security hole. Yes, on a small IoT device, the odds of exploiting that one device are pretty small. But when enough of those are on any given network, that becomes a huge surface area.
Yep.
So Ken, I know you're a huge fan of voice conferences, teleconferences. What am I thinking of? WebExes. But Cisco announced it's acquiring Vocera, Voicea.
Voice A. I'll just read it as Voice A.
Voice A. The makers of a voice assistant called Eva that can join conference calls is what I was trying to say, and take notes. So the idea is it transcribes conversations and automatically highlights what it kind of figures out to be important with an algorithm, as well as, anyone on the call can have the capability to say, Eva, mark that last bit, as a follow-on item or something like that. This will be rolled into WebEx, which is just rolled out actually its own kind of Alexa-based assistant capabilities. I don't know if this will be a supplement to that or eventually to replace that, so they're not depending on Amazon for the tech. But Ken, do virtual assistants make conference calls worse or better?
Unless the tech is foolproof in transcription and other analysis, it's just going to create more work. So worse, in my opinion. I think also very few people will claim that WebEx is their favorite conferencing platform. So having a feature only on WebEx isn't likely to excite very many people. So I don't really know who this is for. Maybe there's somebody who's going to say, oh, just what I was looking for. I'd like to meet that person and, talk to them and understand that, because it doesn't excite me personally.
Well, this reminds me of like 2-3 years ago, there was this big excitement about all of these virtual assistants you kind of roll into email for kind of the same purpose. So instead of CCing your office manager or someone else on your team to, hey, put this call on, on my calendar or something like that, you could loop in this virtual assistant and they would automatically, it would automatically be tied into your Google Calendar and do that. And you're absolutely right. The problem is it wasn't foolproof. It worked 95% of the time, but then 5% of the time it would shoot back this awkward email of, did not compute, please resubmit. And then kind of the illusion of this convenience of this virtual assistant is completely shattered and just becomes a
Hmm.
huge kludge for everybody. The one thing I'll say is the idea of this I really like, because I'm pretty sure every conference call I've ever been on, there's like two other people that don't say anything on the call, but are just there to kind of either take notes, or for whatever reason, they need to be able to hear it, and it's just the only reliable way, because it's really, there's not a lot of like instant transcription services available for conference calls, at least that I know of. Maybe there are. I'm not enough of a conference call nerd to know about that. But if you can have that reliably be there, reliably kind of highlight the action items from the call, and then be able to distribute that so that you don't have so many people sitting on calls that, strictly speaking, don't need to be there other than just to consume the content of it. I think that could be valuable down the line, and and be help out productivity, and only have the people that really need to be on those calls be on those calls. Basically, I don't want to be on conference calls I don't need to be on.
And I can see it be kind of being beneficial to your point, but a word for word transcription is not going to be useful for most people. They want meeting minutes, notes, unless it's intelligent enough to actually generate that kind of information out of a conference call. I don't know anybody except the conference call nerds that you said exist would like it. Do those people exist? I'm not really sure.
Conference call power users. The nerds is pejorative. Let's say, yeah, conference call power users. We'll
If
go
you
with
say so, yeah.
All right, and finally, our last story. This just broke this morning. The workplace rental startup WeWork submitted its S1 filing with the SEC in a move to go public. If you're not familiar with WeWork, evidently you don't work for a software company in the Valley, but you can go there and rent offices or desks or any kind of. You can rent whole floors, and they're all really hip and cool. And there's lots of glass and bespoke wood and beer taps and stuff like that. A lot of nitro cold brew, I feel like, at a WeWork. Overall, the company showed $1.6 billion loss on $1.8 billion in revenue in 2018, with losses growing faster in 2019, albeit they've already shown this year that revenue is showing like it's going to double for the year, even as losses kind of mount. The company has doubled the number of desks and members over the past year. They now have 604,000 desks and 527,000 regular members, they call them, or just people that use their service. WeWork has become a mainstay of startup culture, and we've had a few companies, in fact, host us at WeWork sites for things like Tech Field Day presentations. We've definitely seen our fair share of WeWork facilities, but the company is seeing Uber-like losses without that Uber-like revenue. There's a lot of gnashing of teeth about, is Uber going to be able to be profitable? Their losses are still pretty substantial, even as they pull in a ton of money. WeWork is, signing these long-term lease agreements with these buildings, renovating them, putting a lot of capital investment in there with the hopes that they can pay off. Any concerns for viability here, Ken? WeWork seems like it's fairly embedded now in the startup culture, but is the scale of this, I guess, sustainable?
It doesn't seem like it, because 1.6 billion worth of losses and 1.8 billion on 1.8 billion of revenue means that they spent approximately 3.4 billion last year, right? Total. Yeah. And they're obviously not finding a business model that can make them profitable. So what's the long-term goal here? I don't see how it's workable unless they figure out how to actually turn that around and make money. It doesn't matter how much people like it. If they go bankrupt, they're going away. So what?
Well, I mean, and the idea is that, they've been fairly aggressive in expanding to different cities and adding, increasingly elaborate, kind of accoutrement in a lot of their offices and that kind of stuff. The idea being, though, is once they reach a certain level of distribution, maybe they can slow off of growing the locations. And they've already made that investment. They've already signed those leases. They have those rates locked in. They've spent the money on the renovation. Then they can recoup that with theoretically people using it, as long as they can keep growing users in the markets that they exist in. I mean, maybe, it seems like there is an idea of that's how they would get profitable. At some point, they would need to stop aggressively expanding city to city like they have been doing for the past couple of years. There's also a whole bunch of kerfuffles about how some of the CEO and management are using money, trying to cash out pre-IPO and that kind of stuff. That to me is a management issue. Yes, that may impact their viability, maybe long term, but I'm mostly concerned about this kind of model. I mean, that's the thing, is like, if WeWork goes away, then it just goes back to kind of what it was, where you're just working with smaller rental companies. Yes, and then you probably have to work on making the spaces cool yourself, as opposed to kind of moving into a prefab cool place with a foosball table and a beer keg, right?
And the problem with the slowing of the expansion that you're talking about, and hopefully turning this around to a profitable company, is that it doesn't grow the revenue like it needs to be. Like you were talking about, they aren't anywhere near the Uber levels of revenue that they
Mhm.
need to justify the amount of losses in spending that they're seeing. So how do they rectify that without continuing the expansion and then continuing the losses as a result?
Yeah, they're definitely gonna need to be very careful with, how much they pump the brakes or, make sure that happens at a rate where they, yeah, don't lose, people joining the service. Because, like you said, they have more deaths than a substantial number more deaths than members at this point, and I don't know, I mean, the one good thing WeWork has for them is it doesn't seem like they've burned through goodwill quite like Uber has.
There is that, except
So
whatever this management
yeah, yeah.
exit thing is.
That to me is like you've made private investors mad. The startups that are like no one's claiming like it's unfair to startups that WeWork is necessarily expensive or something like that. So maybe they'll have more goodwill and they'll be able to parlay that into a successful IPO. Risky move though. Looking at those financials, I was surprised to see that they did the S1, but maybe private investors are getting edgy and they want some more capital to expand with. But that just about brings us to the end of the Gestalt IT rundown. Ken, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find more of your great stuff if they are so inclined?
You can find my writing on gestaltit.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ken Nalbone. Make sure you check out techfieldday.com every once in a while for the events I'm part of. I will be in San Francisco in a couple of weeks for VMworld, Tech Field Day Extra at VMworld, so be sure to check that out.
Very exciting. And if you are into mobility at all, this week we have Mobility Field Day going on. It's actually going on right now. It'll be going on until Friday. We have a lot of great presenters going on. So make sure you check that out at techfieldday.com. The live stream will be up there through Friday, and then you can check out the full edited videos. We have our crack staff literally working on getting those videos up as I speak to you today. So those should be up by the time you see. Some of those should be up by the time you see this. So make sure you check that out. We'll be back next Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, running down the IT news of the week that matters to you. Until next time, remember everybody, for me, for Ken, for everyone here at the Gestalt IT family, remember, have a super sparkly day.